Have you ever wondered what wine Jesus made and why it is important? Ignatius le Roux from Charisma Productions in South Africa wrote the book, What Wine Did Jesus Make and Why? In this book he explains that you can know what wine Jesus actually made at the wedding feast in Cana. Ignatius invites the readers on a journey back to the time of Jesus, offering a vivid look at what a wedding feast was like in ancient Israel, including the customs, traditions, and especially the types of wine served. You'll explore what is meant by the good wine and the inferior wine mentioned in the account of the wedding feast in Cana. This video was created to bring life to some of the scenes and details described in the book, aspects of ancient life that are unfamiliar or even unknown to us today. Are you familiar with the Exploring the Lands of the Bible video series by the American archaeologist and Bible professor Dr. Randall Smith? Since the year 2000, Ignatius and his wife Marina have been filming the Bible land tours of Dr. Smith as part of their ministry in South Africa. The videos can be viewed for free on the Charisma Productions website at charisma.org. During the tours, Dr. Randall Smith would often mention facts about wine in Bible times. This is where the couple's interest in the topic converged. One of the sites that Dr. Smith takes you to while on tour in Israel is Tel Megiddo. There he explains something about wine in Bible times.
We know a lot about the biblical people. In the grains, what we find are they largely ate barley. They drank, mostly, on the table, wine mixed with water, or water mixed with a little bit of vinegary wine to kill whatever's in the water you don't want to know about. And the wine actually was usually 1 part wine and 3 or 4 parts water. Remember that they would mix it, put in it honey, and you can drink throughout the meal. But it was an alcohol level that was roughly equivalent to what apple juice has on your table today. In other words, greatly reduced. Today, we raise the level of alcohol in it. But in the ancient period, the only barbarians drank that. Normal people on the table drank a watered-down version that, you could get tipsy, but have you ever drank enough apple juice to actually have it affect you? So we know a lot about what they ate, but we can tell a lot about what they lived like by what their diet was and different things about the way that they lived, okay?
Within walking distance of the Sea of Galilee is the fishing village of Bethsaida, which is where the disciples Andrew and Peter, for example, were from. Dr. Randall Smith, in what is called the winemaker's house, explained the following.
You can see the winemaker's house. We called it the winemaker's house only for one reason. What we're found in the back part of the house, there's a lower area that looked like maybe it was a cistern, but it wasn't plastered. They thought, well, maybe a ritual bath, but it wasn't plastered. There was no way to hold the water. So why did they have a basement? Well, we continued to dig, and in the second season they pulled out very large monolithic pieces of basalt and found underneath of it casks that were for wine. And so we call it the winemaker's house because it's the only place in town where we found a guy with a big storage of wine. There were seals on it, and it looks like somebody here was either making or exporting or was in the wine business, or maybe a wine connoisseur with their own wine cellar. The open courtyard is here, and there was evidence of the pillars of some trellises that had grapes growing across the inside of the house. So probably this house was for the making and for the storage of wine. Remember that it was 1 part wine, 3 or 4 parts water. At Passover, where by the 2nd century you were required to drink 4 cups of wine, it would be 1 part wine, 6 parts water. And you always add honey and a stone. What's the stone for? If you add honey to a drink, what happens to it? It separates. It goes right to the bottom, right? So you put a stone in there, and then during a biblical meal, people would have a red finger. And they'd turn against the stone, breaking up the honey. So it's a lot of water, a little bit of wine, and it tastes something like what we used to call bug juice at camp, and the honey gives it some sweetness. And that would be the normal table wine that was used in the time of the Bible. Expect people at a biblical meal to be sitting there going like this, stirring against the stone. Okay, the winemaker's house. Questions?
In northern Israel, in the Golan Heights, is the ancient city Katzrin. In Katzrin, Randall demonstrated how wine was pressed in Bible times. This was filmed through a net stretched around the press.
Okay, so let me just ask, how many of you saw a Lucy episode in which she was stomping grapes? Okay. All right, that tells you, yeah, some of you don't. Lucy, never mind, I won't even decide. But, okay, now, then you know what the rope is for, because she didn't have one. Do you remember in Psalm 8 and Psalm 81, it says to be sung to the getit. The getit might be a proto-guitar, but gat means to press. So some believe it's to be sung to the stomping of the grapes, and you'll see that in some English translations. If you ever go to the Western Wall and you see people doing this, davening or davening, depending upon where you come from, this probably came from this. Okay? And the idea is they're doing that as a rhythm keeping because prayer in modern Judaism is done out loud, and you can join. It's the reason we used to do this, standing up front. It's so you could join second verse, and come right in with everybody else. That's why they're doing this. This was probably the older expression. All right, so I'm inside of a mosaic floor, and at the right time of year, after 6 months of no rain, a long, hot, dry summer, the miracle fruit comes out. That's the grape. Now, in Judea, we don't have any rain at all for 6 months, and during that 6 months, that's when the grapes grow. It takes 7 inches of rainfall a year on the ground to get fruit on trees. And yet we don't have any rainfall at all, and the grapes come out. So where did they get their rain? The dewfall is equal to 7.5 inches a year. And as a result, you get enough to produce beautiful, lush grapes. And of course, it was so important because, by Numbers 13 already, they're coming into the land, they're going, wow, you can't believe these grapes. Yeah. Now, the important thing is, at the end of that long, hot, dry summer, you dump your grapes in here. And remember that you're going to do this in bare feet because you don't want to break the seed. In the seeds are such high tannins that you will get a very harsh, what we call dry wine. It'll become very harsh. So you want to step on it with bare feet. You want to break open the skin, crush the actual pulp, make the seed separate, but not break the seed. It's going to pour out of there down into an area like this that has a flat dish, and then an amphora will be inserted into the bottom here, and on the top a cloth will be put there. And you will, when you pick up the juice that flows there, you're going to get juice, skin, seed, pulp, and every bug in the neighborhood. So you're going to need to strain out the gnat. These Pharisees, they strain at gnats and swallow camels. Okay? It's an image well known to everybody. Wine in the Bible wasn't like wine you have today. We boost the alcohol today in the wine, whereas in antiquity, particularly in the Roman period, it would have been much less than it is today. In fact, it would also have been much more sour than what you're used to. And on the table of a normal home, you would have water mixed with a little bit of sour wine, and that was to kill everything in the water you don't want to know about. The only way to keep water clear and clean in antiquity was darkness. As soon as it saw the sunlight, it could start growing things. And so you had to put something in it that killed everything. So you had water on the table that tasted a little bit like some vinegar was in it. And you had wine on the table, 1 part wine, usually 3 or 4 parts water.
In the ancient Roman port city of Ostia Antica in Italy, Randall took the group to a communal kitchen of the working class. There he drew their attention to the dolium that was still buried in the floor after all these years. A dolium is a very large terracotta pot in which they stored olive oil, grain, and wine. In Italy, they fermented the grape juice, called must, in a dolium. Randall explained the use of a dolium.
So you have a dolio. These are thermal jars. Now, the important thing is wine was an important part of the diet here. There's a reason. Now, the funny part about wine is that the shape of the vat determines the taste of the wine. So you'll find that today a lot of things are quite different than they used to be because of the mechanics of fermentation. But in the ancient world, left without any of the stainless steel tanks, left without any of the modernity, what you had to do was essentially to create a full-bodied wine, there was sediment that was found as you pour. So I'll take a jar and I'll put a cheesecloth over it, and I'll take the wine slop, which is the stuff that I've stomped, and push it over. It'll drip down, and the wine will, or the grape juice will go inside. Now, wine is generally put in amphorae. Those are double-handled jars. Amphi, double-handled jars. And they're put in long, pointy jars. That's because they fit in the hull of a ship that way. They're transported, and so you pack them alongside of each other, and then you set them in a second row and a third row in the bottom, in the bow of a ship. And they'll pack that way. That's why they chose that. It's terribly impractical in your home because you got to have a stand to put it in, right? But there's another reason. It gives a lot of downward motion with sediment as it comes down along the sides. When you want to change the body of a wine, you move it from one shape to another, allowing the sediment to fall in different ways. This will allow the solids that are in it to allow the sugars to release in a variety of ways.
When looking at what wine Jesus made, it is very interesting to note all the non-alcoholic products that were available in Bible times. One of these was grape must syrup. Ingrid de Waal of the wine estate Canet outside of Stellenbosch made real grape must syrup until recently. She gave Charisma Productions the opportunity to film one of the last times that she did. The must, which is the juice of the grapes that have been pressed and filtered the previous day, is poured into stainless steel pots at 6 a.m. The pots are placed outdoors on wood fires. After the must has been poured into the pots, it is boiled for about 10 hours while the fire is constantly raked out and pushed back under the pots so that the must continues to boil but does not burn. This process allows the must to boil for hours so that the water can evaporate until only about 20% of the must is left in the pots. Grape must syrup can be used in various ways on bread or in making certain recipes. Because it is a grape extract, it makes a refreshing drink when dissolved in water or in milk. Now there's something particularly fascinating about winemaking in Bible times, a detail that has puzzled translators for years. It centers around the passage found in Proverbs 23:31. In the New American Standard Bible, for instance, it reads, "Do not look on the wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly." That brought up the question, when is wine red? According to sources, most wine in Bible times in Israel was red anyway. Furthermore, they did not have clear wine, nor do they drink from a glass. So when does wine sparkle? It was a surprise to learn that the word translated as sparkles is the Hebrew word for eye. There wasn't a Bible translation found that translated this word as eye. It seemed as if the translators didn't understand what Solomon was writing about when he used this word. Ignatius then asked a winemaker at Sievenfach wine estate, Charles Lorenz, if he had ever seen must form an eye during the fermentation process. Charles invited Ignatius and his wife Marina to visit Sievenfach wine cellars to see the phenomenon where the must from the white grapes swirls around in the large stainless steel tanks. In the wine cellars, Charles showed them the tank with the fermenting white must. Ignatius climbed up the long ladder to film this phenomenon. When you look at the swirling must, it looks as if there is a big fire under the tank, but there is not. In fact, the temperature of the must is electronically cooled in the tank, otherwise it would get too hot and then it oxidizes and would be ruined. The swirling action is brought about by the fermentation process. The phenomenon of the must swirling might to a certain extent resemble an eye, like the center of a whirlpool, but the question remained if this is the eye that Solomon refers to in Proverbs 23:31. This process was done with white grape must. In Israel, however, they mainly use red grapes. Charles then showed them how red grapes must ferments. All they could see were the skins of the grapes floating on top. After some of the skins were scraped aside, they could see that the must was fermenting. While not swirling as strongly as the white grape must, it was bubbling underneath those skins. This is stirred regularly so that the yeast on the skins can mix with more of the sugar in the must to form more alcohol. So what was Solomon talking about when he said that the wine makes an eye? To continue the research, the Raka wine estate of the Dreyer family in Stanford Valley in South Africa was approached to see if they could help press and ferment grapes as it was done in Bible times. The two Dreyer brothers, Joseph and Peter, immediately agreed to help. Peter, who is the farm manager, packed a bunch of freshly picked red grapes into a container. Marina kicked off her shoes and stomped the grapes in the container like it was done in Bible times. She kept stomping until all the juice from the grapes was pressed out. As Randall explained, grape must was often filtered through a cloth, but it could also be filtered through the pressed grape stems. Peter tilted the container and held some of the stomped grape stems in front of the must as it dripped through the handle of the container into a bucket. It was amazing to see how effective this method was. Peter then added to the container with the already pressed grapes an equal amount of water. Marina then thoroughly stomped this pulp again, and when she was finished it was filtered through the grape stems into a second bucket. This produced a bucket with what would be called second-grade must. The first pressing of the must would be fermented to make the first grade, or so-called royal wine, of which Esther 1:7 speaks. The second grade must would be fermented to make the lower grade wine known as poshka. As you can see, after all, Marina could enjoy some of those delicious grapes herself. Daily, Ignatius and Marina would drive to the winery to observe the must in the two containers, checking the fermentation process. Their real reason was to see if there would be something observed that could be considered an eye, or that would indicate when the must would turn red. On the first day, the first grade must had a rough texture as if it were starting to foam slightly, while the second grade must was still clear and clean with a few seeds floating on top. On the second day, the first grade must started to foam a little more, while the second grade must was now covered with foam. On the third day, the first grade must was covered with thick foam as well as various sized bubbles. The second grade must was still covered with foam. On the fourth day, both the first and the second grade must, as you can see, were covered with a thick layer of foam. The only noticeable difference between the first grade and the second grade must was the texture of the foam. On the fifth day, the foam of both the first and second grade must was clearly redder. The first grade must also had large bubbles, and there were more of them. On the sixth day, they were completely surprised. They couldn't believe their eyes. Look at what they saw. Just look at these big bubbles in the foam on the first grade must. Don't these bubbles look like eyes? This was likely what Solomon was referring to when he wrote in Proverbs 23:31, translated from the Hebrew, "Look no more at the wine when it becomes red, when it gives its eye." Now there is something that needs to be clarified. In the Bible translations, we read that the wine gives its eye in the cup. However, in the book, we explain that the word translated as cup is any container which could hold the wine, such as the reservoir at the winepress. Therefore, it should be translated, "Look no more at the wine when it has become red, when it gives its eye in the reservoir." When Joseph Dreyer, the winemaker, heard about the discovery of the eye, he came to see it for himself. He also measured the sugar content and the temperature of the must as part of the experiment. Due to the layer of foam during the first 5 days of fermentation, the color of the must itself could not be seen. At the beginning, when the must was filtered through the stems, it was more of a cloudy pink, than red. Now through these eyes, the must was able to be seen. It now had a visibly darker, redder color. The previous day the foam had already been visibly redder. Now also the must itself was bright red. On top of the must floated these bubbles that looked just like eyes. It was too good to be true. The discovery of these eyes was a major breakthrough because it helped, as elaborated in the book, to better understand many things about the process by which wine was made in Bible times. According to what we've just seen, the Hebrew might be rendered, "Look no more at the wine when it has become red, when it gives its eye in the reservoir." Now we better understand what Solomon was talking about when he wrote Proverbs 23:31. Through the clear membrane of the eye, the fermenting must could be seen, and it was distinctly redder. Seeing these eyes on the first-grade must was a phenomenal breakthrough. Surely something not seen by many in our modern era. Besides this discovery, in the book Ignatius expresses his surprise when he came across the exhibition of glassware from Bible times in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. Look at the different colors that the glassmakers could give to the glass. It is clear that this glass is more fragile, thus less usable than the strong glass we know today. Therefore, this glass wasn't used for wine storage as is done today. As explained in the book, it is only since the 1700s that strong enough glass for wine storage could be made. During the wedding feast, Jesus commanded the servants to fill the 6 stone pots with water. At the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, there is a set of stone jugs hewn from sandstone rocks. As you can see, these stone pots vary in size depending on the size of the rock from which each was hewn. In addition to the stone jugs, there is also an exhibit of Egyptian amphorae. These amphorae, combined with stone jugs or pots, made a wine set for use at wedding feasts so that water and wine from it could be mixed. There is also this beautiful bowl on display. Although this particular bowl dates from 700 to 600 BC, it is a good example of what a crater looked like in which the water and the wine were mixed, as explained in the book. The book mentions a set of silver dinnerware that a local Italian tour guide named Teresa showed the tour group in the Naples Museum.
I would like to show you one of the masterpieces of this section. You can already notice the presence of a showcase with some silver objects. It's a silver table service found in Pompeii in 1930, so it's really such a recent discovery. You can go all around this showcase and really appreciate the beauty and the modernity of this collection. This is impressive. All these spoons and all these little cups were especially to melt liquids. You know, wine, for example, was not as liquid as our wine today. It was a very spicy wine, and they needed to melt it with water, but even with some other ingredients such as honey or cheese. But this is one of the big differences with us today. It was much thicker, yeah. And to make it more liquid, it was necessary to melt it even with the scented waters, for example.
The book also describes the ancient wine farm Villa Regina in Boscoreale, Italy. This wine farm, which was first discovered in 1977, had been buried under the lava of Mount Vesuvius since 79 AD. At this wine farm, Dr. Randall Smith explained to us the significance of this discovery.
After our visit to the port of Pozzuoli, we moved along to where Mount Vesuvius had exploded in the year 79, not 12 years after Paul had been beheaded in Rome. Making our way along the edge of where the pyroclastic flow had filled up and is now a bustling set of cities, we made our way to visit an ancient vineyard and an ancient winery, an ancient wine-making place. This was a villa rustica, a farmhouse from the ancient period, but it had been now found meters below the surface, and you look down into it. There was a large complex of buildings being built here, and there was an emergency excavation found. When they found it, they found the footprint of a villa rustica, an active farm for the making of wine from the period that we are studying, exactly at the time. So if you had been coming here at the time of Paul and you were walking along, you'd be at that level down there. This is all flow. This is all the volcano, okay? So again, you're down at that level and you're walking along and you come upon this is a farmhouse. Classic picture of a farmhouse of what Paul would have seen sitting out on the side in many places. This is just one we found. So we know that the building was burned. The original building that was here, most of it was burned, the top of it was burned down, and the original footprint and the base of the building is its original building. But for our purposes, most people were either drinking conditum, spiced wine, or they had something called posca. Posca is it's a wine that is like a vinegary wine that is mixed with water. Most people, what they drank in the biblical period, you couldn't stomach. It was lower on alcohol, not higher, but it had a much more sour taste than you're familiar with. It was actually so sour, in today's world, we would dump all kinds of sugaring in it. The single greatest change in the diet in modernity is you take in multiple times the level of sugar that anyone in the history of the planet has done, and it is affecting the brains of our culture. And you see it, and now you have some shunning away from it, some honeys and things like that. The only sweetener of antiquity was honey. We walked around this ancient villa because we wanted to see the methods of making ancient wines and storing them. Well, an emergency dig means you're in the middle of a housing project and you're trying to build another big building here, and they discovered antiquities and now you're not allowed. Now the Ministry of Culture stops you and you're no longer allowed to do that. So they'll come and they'll do an emergency to give you excavators, and what they're trying to do is stop people from destroying the antiquities. And actually what they've done here is they've given you a style of, a type of grape that was grown here in antiquity. They found others, brought them here, and these are new vines of the same variety of the old vines that were here. Okay? So you have a Villa Rustica, and if you take a look, what you'll see is a very large press here. Now they have two kinds of presses here. They have an olive press and they have a wine press here. The interesting thing is that it takes, for one press, you need, one press will handle about what 20 acres can do. So if you have a big winch style press, that means you probably have at least 20 acres. Now remember, I'm stomping grapes or breaking grapes because I want the skin to break, I want the juice to come out of the flesh, but I don't want the seeds to break. If I break the seeds, I'll embitter the wine. So the feet are a perfect device for this. Afterwards, you're going to get a fermentation vat. They found here, do you see the dolio? They're in the ground there. Those are fermentation vats. You cannot find, you won't see any like that elsewhere in the country, all organized in their original fashion. So this is the only place you can see this. And the important thing is then they're sitting in there for about a week or 10 days, the fermentation process. And then afterwards, we're going to pull it out of the dolia. Interestingly enough, they found stacks and stacks of the amphorae here, and some of them they were marked already for sale. So we saw on the outside of a building the ans with a number, a Roman numeral. They also matched the amphorae, which told them you could have the number of ans for sale. So we know that some of it was being shipped out, but some of it was being locally used. So it's kind of an interesting, this is a full working farm. It's the only one we have that's full working of rustica. We have one other that's close to it outside of Pompeii called the Villa of the Mysteries. And those two are everything we know about ancient winemaking techniques and everything we know about the Italic Peninsula and how they did the wine operations to sale. And that's the thing that is important about what you're saying, and it's hard for me to pass on to you the enthusiasm of it as an archaeologist. The incredible thing is there's nowhere else that we can find a clear, defined, this is how they did it. And because Jastrzębski knew how to do the horticultural casts, we can even find which vines, what were they doing, what was the combination, what were they using. We have Pliny the Elder, who gives us he's an old ancient encyclopediarian. He gives us an ancient encyclopedia, and it tells you about the processes of wine. And so that's the best we can do. Questions about the villa? So a villa rustica is any kind of rustic villa, farm villa. That's just a nice way of saying farm so Cicero had a number of these.
We at Kerygma Productions are excited to introduce this book and trust that you will get your own copy. There's a vast difference between the way that wine was made in Bible times and today. This book was written to help people know what wine Jesus actually made and why he made it. In this book you will learn about what ancient wine actually was and what it was used for, so that when you read the Bible you will understand what the text means. More importantly, you will get to know the Lord Jesus much better. What Wine Did Jesus Make and Why is available on the Kerygma Productions website as a printed book as well as an e-book, available at kerygma.org. Make sure you order your copy today. Dr. Randall Smith's Exploring the Lands of the Bible video series can also be reviewed on the Kerygma Productions website. New videos are announced in the newsletter, the Kerygma Bulletin. Subscribe to that on the website so that you won't miss anything. We look forward from hearing you after you have read What Wine Did Jesus Make and Why? Please share your feedback with us by posting a review below the book on the Kerygma website. The book offers an exciting journey of discovery. Enjoy the adventure.